Hey, Steve Fox and York the Guide Dog back again with another video. If you're new to the channel, I am legally blind. I have retinitis pigmentosa, and this is Yorkie here, my amazing little buddy, my guide dog who gets me around the place, keeps me out of trouble. Anyway, in this video, I wanted to talk about my retinitis pigmentosa, the early signs, my diagnosis, and basically how things have worked out over a lifetime. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, are diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa every day. And if you're anything like me, I felt this need, even though you know and you're told that everybody's RP is different. You know, some people lose all their sight in childhood. Others have pretty good vision into their 70s. I was somewhere in the middle, but somehow you just want to hear from other people who are going through the same thing. So thought I'd throw my story out there and hopefully it'll help somebody. Just to reassure you, it's not a life sentence. It's not the end of the world. So why am I holding this bunch of papers here? Well, I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa when I was quite young, and I saw the same ophthalmologist for over 20 years. And on my final visit to that particular ophthalmologist, he said, "Here, you might as well keep this." He was retiring. So he gave me my file, and I'm not sure that too many people get to look through their medical files. So it was pretty interesting to look through. I'm holding these papers. Don't get the idea that I can read these papers, but I have been through them with my wife, and I'll share some of it with you. It's full of letters between my ophthalmologist, my doctor, field of view, vision tests, my charts, all those things. It doesn't look like a lot for 20 odd years, but that's what it is. Going back to the very early signs of my RP, retinitis pigmentosa. When I was 3 or 4, talking to my parents, we had a kitchen bench in our house that sort of had an overhang. And it was about head height for me at the time. And I used to hit my head on it all the time. And they thought I was clumsy. But it probably was an early sign that my peripheral vision wasn't quite right. We also had a hallway in that house that was a little bit dimly lit. Now the door to that hall was always open, but occasionally somebody would close that door, and if they did, bang, I would either walk or sometimes run into that door. That was unfortunate, but it was probably also a sign that my night vision wasn't quite right. And another early memory that I have was if I dropped something, I could never find it. I'd look down, but I couldn't see it. My peripheral vision wasn't good enough to pick up objects on the floor. So what I used to do is I'd get right down on the floor and I'd scan the room with my eyes, looking along the floor. I was using my central vision because my peripheral vision wasn't working. But they were cues that my family didn't pick up on because there was no history of retinitis pigmentosa. Nobody knew what retinitis pigmentosa was. I'm no doctor, but retinitis pigmentosa is the loss of the you right, buddy? Yorkie's snuggling up. It's the loss of the photoreceptor cells in the back of your eye. So there are 2 types of cells. You have the rods around the outside, which are responsible for your peripheral vision and your night vision. And you have the cones in the middle that are responsible for your central vision, your distance vision, your close-up, fine work, you know, reading, writing, and your color as well. Retinitis pigmentosa is the progressive loss of those photoreceptor cells. It's a genetic disease, it's hereditary, and it's a degenerative disease. So it's something that happens over time. And it depends on what type you have. These days they have genetic testing and people can figure out what type of RP they have. There was no genetic testing when I was diagnosed in the early stages. So they were the early signs of my RP, but as yet nobody picked up on any of those signs. I didn't even wear glasses until I started school, but I was accident prone. I was hit in the head with a bat a few times when I was young. Sounds pretty dramatic, but you know, playing sport, I walked into other kids swinging a bat. I was hit in the face with a ball a few times. So I got smacked in the nose and ended up with a broken nose. I was running in an athletics race at twilight, and obviously my vision wasn't great, and I veered off the track and ran into a post. On my first visit to the ophthalmologist, apparently I told him that I couldn't see straight. I didn't know how to put it into words. So he tested my central vision, normal eye test, and my left eye, according to the records, came in at 612. So I could see at 6 meters what most people could see at 12 meters. Not that bad. And in my right eye, a little worse, I could see at 6 meters what most people could see at 18 meters. So that was 20/40 or 20/60 vision. But when they did the visual field test, that was something that I think that shocked everybody. My visual field in my left eye came in at 10 degrees, and my visual field in my right eye was 12 degrees. Most people have 170 or 180 degrees of vision. So you can see above and below and left and right when you're looking ahead. You have a full field of vision, but I didn't have that according to these tests. Now, I'm sure looking back as an adult and bearing in mind what I was doing at the time, I was playing soccer and football and cricket and basketball. I'm sure that when my visual field was tested in the ophthalmologist's rooms, it was done with artificial light. I'm pretty sure in daylight, in bright sunlight, my visual fields weren't quite that bad, but they were pretty severely restricted. Now the doctor, he did the usual thing, dilated my pupils, had a good look at my retina, but he wasn't 100% sure. So he sent me off for further testing. And that referral is in here as well. I had to go to the Sydney Eye Hospital early in the morning. It was going to take a full day. And I remember they pulled out a needle. I thought it was an elephant tranquilizer, but they injected me with dye and all sorts of things. And apparently it was electrophysiological testing or something. And they took images of my retina, and those images are still in here too. And the report came back and it said it wasn't typical RP. There were some problems with my retina. The pigment wasn't right. Wasn't typical, but it was retinitis pigmentosa. And there's a letter in here that went back to my family doctor. It said, Stephen has retinitis pigmentosa and his prognosis is poor. So by the time we got back to the ophthalmologist, I was 12. And he sat us down and explained what retinitis pigmentosa was, that I had it, and he said, in the words, I still remember them, he said, more than likely I'd be blind by the time I was 21. And I'm sure my parents were devastated. I remember driving home that night. We lived a long way away, and Mum was very quiet in the car and Dad was talking, and he was trying to reassure me that everything would be okay. And he said, you know, really nothing had changed. I was going to school. They didn't see any point in taking me out of school where I was doing well, and I was playing sport and everything was okay. So he wanted to teach me to be independent. He wanted me to grow up like any other kid, which in hindsight, you know, it did work well for me. But Dad was a disciplinarian. He was old school. He didn't talk about a lot of things. And that was the last time he ever spoke to me about me going blind. He never mentioned it again. So pretty much I was left to deal with it on my own. And that was pretty hard. So I wasn't referred to any of the support services, Blind Society, guide dogs, or anything like that. And life just went on. You know, when you're dealing with something like this and you don't have anyone to talk to about it, there is a grieving period that you go through. You know, there's the sadness, and for me there was a lot of anger for a while. When you don't have anybody to share that with, you build up this internal dialogue. And for me, I thought my life would be over when I went blind. I thought that would be it. You know, I thought my life was over at 21, and that was tough to deal with for a long time. When you've got no one to share it with, the images that you paint for yourself, or in my case, are much worse than the reality. So in hindsight, I just wish I had somebody to talk to about it. I just wish that I had someone to talk things through, maybe somebody that had been there, done that, and they could have eased some of those fears, because losing your eyesight, it's not the end of the world. And thankfully for the next few years, my eyes were fairly stable. The visual fields, the tests remained the same. Even a couple of years on, my acuity in my right eye seemed to have improved. I did well at school, but I couldn't always see the blackboard, you know. And there were times when the room wasn't quite well lit, and I did struggle. And I did get into trouble for not writing down what was on the blackboard. And at the time, I kind of let people think that I did it because I didn't want to. I didn't let people know that I couldn't read the blackboard. I didn't want people to know what I was going through. And it kind of went back to, you know, the conversation that I had with my father. I didn't want to be treated differently. And so it became this big secret that you keep. And that's what stayed with me for a long time. But my eyes were fairly stable. And when I was 17, I even got a driver's license. You know, my central vision was okay. My peripheral vision, there was no test for that on a driver's license in those days. So I drove a car for a while. Maybe I shouldn't have done, but thankfully I never had an accident, and I stopped driving before it became an issue. I was independent. When I was 20, I jumped on a plane, moved to the other side of the country, well away from family and friends, all of my support networks, and started a new life as a radio announcer. And I did that for 25 plus years. When you've got retinitis pigmentosa, you know, if you're lucky like I was, you do have plateaus, and your vision can be stable for a while. But over time, it continued to deteriorate. I went from 612 to 618 to 624. So I could see at 6 meters what most people could see at 24 meters. And my night vision was always bad. But then it progressed so that my vision in dim light, not necessarily nighttime, was poor. And then in just artificial light, so what most people would consider to be a brightly lit room, to me, became a real struggle. It was dim. By the time I got to my late 20s, my vision had become cloudy. I'd lost all my colours. You know, I thought, well, this is it. This is what it's like to go blind. I went back to the ophthalmologist, and he looked and examined, and he said, "You've got cataracts." So when I was 27, he operated on my right eye, removed the cataract, and it was like that veil, that cloud had been lifted. He did the left eye the following year, and my eyes, they improved, you know. I could see colours again, and things became bright again. I had corrected lenses, so things seemed, you know, much better for a while. But again, over time, my RP, the retinitis pigmentosa, the photoreceptor cells, losing them over time gradually, it started to catch up with me again. And my eyes went 636, 648, until I got to my 40s, and then I really started to struggle. My visual fields were coming in 8 degrees, 7 degrees, 6 degrees, 5 degrees, and that independence that I had started to disappear. You know, I became more reliant on my wife. I got married in my mid-20s. My friends, I couldn't walk down the street on my own. I needed to reach out for support, something that I should have done a long time ago. My central vision was less than 660, so I couldn't see at 6 meters what most people could see at 60 meters. That's legally blind. My peripheral vision was a lot less than 10 degrees. Again, legally blind. But when I reached out for help and I became immersed in the blind, vision impaired community, then I realized how many supports are out there and the assistive technology that's around today. I started using a cane, so I got my independence back. I got Yorkie here, my amazing guide dog, and that picture that I'd painted for myself, you know, when I was young, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. You know, going blind, losing your vision, it's a different way to live, But it's not the worst thing in the world. You know, I still surf legally blind. I go stand-up paddleboarding. You know, York and I are out exploring the world together. I have my independence back. That internal dialogue that you create for yourself, it's not as bad as that when the reality does hit you. So I still have a tiny piece of vision. It's not really useful vision, but I do appreciate being able to see things from time to time. You know, I have a bright light attached to the back of that camera so I can look at the camera. I can't see the camera, but I can see where that bright light is. That's my story. That's what it was like for me. The signs of my retinitis pigmentosa, my early diagnosis, the progression of my retinitis pigmentosa, and hopefully that's helped. If it did, please smash that like button. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Steve Fox and York the Guide Dog. Ring the bell, get the notifications. We'd love to hear some of your comments down below as well. You know, we do have some fun in our YouTube videos. We get out and explore the world, don't we, buddy? And share all sorts of useful information for the blind and vision impaired. So please consider subscribing. And if you do, we'll be seeing you in our next video. Thanks for watching.